This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories: China and the United States agreed to resume military communication after President Xi and Biden meet in San Francisco. We'll be finding out why the American state of Iowa has a special connection with the Chinese president. Our other headlines: Israel orders civilians to leave parts of southern Gaza as its forces continue to occupy the territory's largest hospital. And a lethal chemical cocktail. An exclusive CGTN investigation uncovers dangerous levels of pollution in UK rivers. China and the United States have agreed to resume high-level military communications following the meeting between President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden in San Francisco. They met face-to-face for the first time in a year. Xi told Biden that the world is big enough for both countries to succeed, while Biden held these talks as constructive. Our correspondent Wu Luwei reports.
President Joe Biden welcomed President Xi Jinping upon his arrival at Filoli Estate. It was their first meeting in a year since they last met on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali. In opening remarks, President Xi underscored his long-standing view that cooperation between the world's two largest economies will benefit both their peoples and the rest of the world. President Xi said the world is big enough for the two countries to succeed.
My view is consistent, which is that major country competition is not a prevailing trend of current times and cannot solve the problems facing China and the United States or the world at large. Planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed, and one country's success is an opportunity for the other.
President Xi made it clear that China does not have a plan to unseat the United States. But the Chinese president said the U.S. should not scheme to suppress and contain China. During their talks, President Xi said that despite differences in culture and social systems, mutual benefit could pave the way for more promising relations.
It is an objective fact that China and the United States are different in history, culture, social system, and development path. However, as long as we respect each other, coexist in peace and pursue win-win cooperation, we will be fully capable of rising above differences and find the right way for the two major countries to get along with each other. I firmly believe in the promising future of the bilateral relationship.
The Chinese president proposed building together 5 pillars for better bilateral ties. First, developing a right perception of each other, so the two countries can coexist in mutual respect and peace. Second, managing disagreements and untoward incidents effectively through calm, frequent communication. Third, advancing mutually beneficial cooperation, not just in traditional areas like trade, but in emerging and urgent issues such as climate change and artificial intelligence. Fourth, shouldering responsibilities as major countries by stepping up coordination and cooperation on international and regional issues. Fifth, promoting people-to-people exchanges. President Xi Jinping also reaffirmed China's position on the Taiwan question. On trade, he urged the U.S. to take China's concerns seriously and lift its unilateral sanctions on Chinese economic entities. For his part, President Biden said it was important to keep the two countries' competition in check and called for joint efforts to tackle common challenges.
We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And we also have to manage it responsibly, that competition. That's what the United States wants and what we intend to do. I also believe it's what the world wants for both of us, candid exchange. We also have a responsibility to our people and the work in the world to work together when we see it in our interest to do so.
The two presidents agreed to resume high-level military-to-military communication on the basis of equality and respect. They also agreed to increase passenger flights between the US and China by early next year, and to expand exchanges in various sectors.
Well, our correspondent Dong Shui is in Beijing. Dong Shui, what more can you tell us?
Well, Jamie, the highly anticipated bilateral meetings has wrapped up by China's President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden. Reached agreements across several key areas. This includes joint efforts to combat the illegal trade in opioid drug fentanyl and the resumption of military-to-military communications. And the two leaders have also committed to an intergovernmental dialogue on artificial intelligence while expanding direct flights between China and the United States. And they've also pledged to boost communication in education, youth affairs, culture, and businesses. Well, obviously, the outcomes mark a step forward, so to speak, for both nations after President Xi and President Biden spent 4 hours together in meetings, and also that include a working lunch and a garden stroll. As the world's two largest economies, I think they've sought to portray their countries not simply as economic competitors, but also capable of avoiding a zero-sum game. Well, during their face-to-face meeting, President Xi said turning away for each other is not an option for China and the United States. He stressed that there is more than enough room on the earth for both nations to succeed, and that is unrealistic for one side to reshape the other. President Biden, on the other hand, praised the talks as, I quote, some of the most constructive and productive discussions he's ever had. He said that the two sides made real progress. And here in Beijing, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson has also praised the San Francisco meeting as the beginning of a new chapter in China-U.S. relations, calling it constructive, strategic, and predicting it will have a profound impact on future bilateral ties. And for many observers, the meetings between Xi and Biden is seen as a stabilizing force in the face of deteriorating relations and the risk of conflict. Well, more stability means increased cooperation, isn't it? And the meetings has already instilled some confidence among business communities in both countries. Jamie?
Dong Shui, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dong Shui in Beijing. Well, Rana Mitter is Professor of History and Director of the China Centre at Oxford University.
The mood music in this meeting was really pretty positive. It was clear that both sides, the Chinese side and the American side, are keen to lower the temperature in what's often a very turbulent relationship. And there are practical takeaways, including in particular the return of military-to-military conversations and contacts that suggest that both sides are very keen to try and make sure the relationship is productive, even if it's not necessarily very warm. The fact that agreement has been reached, at least in some areas, on this very contentious topic is a sign that maybe even when they have political differences, China and the US will be able to act together in certain areas for the greater good. So that's a good sign.
What comes next, I guess, is the real balancing act, isn't it? I mean, how do you foresee economic interests of each country and national security considerations being balanced in the relationship?
Yes, the really difficult part of the relationship between the two is that there are some areas that are simply incompatible in the views of each country's national security worldview. So the United States is making it very clear that some of the very highest ends of technology, areas where the United States has a lead, both in terms of research and in terms of partnerships around the world, it's keen to make sure that China does not get a lead in those sorts of areas. And it's pretty upfront about the fact that it will continue economic policies that do not allow those technologies to come to China. On the Chinese side, China has been pushing much harder on the idea that it wants to restrain as much industrial and technological production at home as possible.
President Xi delivered a positive message to US business leaders in San Francisco. I mean, how do you interpret his remarks regarding China being what he described as a big market and a friend to the United States?
The size of China's market isn't in doubt. I think one of the things that's useful to China is to have American and other Western firms in the country. If they were all basically thrown out, then there would be very little opportunity for China to use its economic connections with the United States to essentially push for geopolitical goals. So it's got an interest in having American firms there. That said, big firms, Apple would be an example, make an awful lot of money in China. And therefore, there's a symbiosis between the two sides in which it's clearly going to be the case that there'll be an American presence in China in business terms for quite some time to come.
Just looking ahead, is the expectation now unabated improvement in this relationship? Do you anticipate a sustained improvement in China-US relations based on the outcomes of this summit, or do you still see many insurmountable challenges ahead?
I think there are a lot of challenges for the medium term. The fact is the United States and its allies are going to continue to be a major presence in Asia for years, probably decades to come. That's of course Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Singapore. So that was a long time. In the short term, I do expect actually that things will be calmer. For the next year or so, with the United States and China investing in the economy firing again. And for that, you need geopolitical stability. We have at least in Eastern Europe. I think both the US and China know that any kind of conflict in Asia-Pacific region will be a disaster, not just in human terms, but also in terms of the global economy. And I think both sides are going to restrain themselves to try and prevent that outcome.
China's President Xi Jinping first visited the United States in 1985 when he led an agricultural delegation to the state of Iowa. It was a trip that would leave a lasting impression for all concerned. Dan Williams report.
Iowa holds a special place in US-China relations. In 1980, a year after diplomatic relations were established, a delegation of Chinese governors visited the US. The trip included a stop in Iowa. Back then, Kenneth Quinn was working for the Iowa governor, Robert.
The leader of the delegation province. His name was Shi Jong-sun. He's the father of President Xi Jinping.
Fast forward 5 years to the spring of 1985, and following in his father's footsteps, Xi Jinping, then a county-level delegation to the US. That trip also included a stop in Iowa. At that time, Terry Branstad was the governor of Iowa.
He was in his early 30s. He was only a party secretary of one of the counties in our sister state, Hebei province. His business card said, Feed Association of Shishazhuang.
Part of the trip saw the delegation stay with families in their homes in the city. Xi Jinping stayed in this house. Sarah served as the executive director of Iowa Sister States, a non-profit that built Iowa partnerships.
The home mom taught him about popcorn. It was just sort of like home hospitality personified.
Forward to 2011, and Xi Jinping was now China's vice president. Terry Branstad was again serving as governor of Iowa. Branstad met with Xi in China, and it was Xi who reminded Branstad of their previous meeting.
And he spent 45 minutes telling me how much he loved Iowa. He had his itinerary from the 85 trip, and he calls us old friends.
Xi Jinping had a visit to Washington, D.C. planned for early 2012. He requested a stop to Iowa to be added.
They said, well, why are you going to Iowa? And when Xi Jinping told the story, he just pointed to the old friends like this and said, that's why I'm coming to Iowa.
So in February 2012, Xi Jinping, shortly before becoming president, once again travelled to Iowa. The tour saw Xi return to Mexico.
He said, you were the first people we met in America. You are America to me.
Since that trip, relations between China and the US have continued to face challenges. But the old friends in Iowa remain optimistic that common ground exists.
It's a challenging time right now, but hopefully things will get better. And the personal relationships can go a long ways to kind of overcome some of the challenges and tensions between our two countries.
On his 1985 trip, the China delegation also visited San Francisco, this year's APEC host city. Nearly 40 years on, Xi Jinping returns, but the spotlight on him will be significantly brighter this time around. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the head of Gaza's biggest hospital says the situation is catastrophic as Israeli forces continue their raid inside the Al-Shifa compound.
This week on Razor, reaching to the edge of space using only solar power. And are flying cars the future of urban transport?
Flying cars are kind of the perennial dream of the future. You know, we have everything else that was dreamed up in science fiction over the last 100 years. But when we look in the sky, like, where are the flying cars?
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top story. China and the United States agreed to resume military communication after President Xi and Biden meet in San Francisco. Israel has ordered civilians to leave parts of southern Gaza, raising fears its conflict against the Palestinian armed group Hamas could spread to areas it had previously urged people to move to for safety. Israeli troops continued to occupy Gaza's biggest hospital, which it says was being used by Hamas as a base, a claim the group denies. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council has passed a resolution calling for extended humanitarian pauses to allow aid access into Gaza. Israel began striking the Palestinian enclave after Hamas attacked southern Israel on the 7th of October. Well, Israel is warning a very strong force may need to remain in Gaza for the near future to prevent Hamas from re-emerging. But US President Joe Biden has warned that occupying Gaza would be a big mistake. Let's talk now to our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Sarah, what more have we heard from the Israeli government?
Hi there, Jamie. Yes, more talk on what a post-Hamas Gaza would look like, this time from the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. He came out to say that if we pull back, then who will take over? We can't leave a vacuum. We have to think about what will be the mechanism. Now, you might remember that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he spoke about a week or so ago about this exact issue, saying that Israel will have a security presence inside Gaza for an indefinite period. Now, this is causing a lot of concern internationally over what is perceived as a lack of a plan by Israel of just how to deal with this situation post-war. And you did mention there that President Biden has said that there needs to be a two-state solution, also echoed by the Secretary of State. Now, let's go back to Benjamin Netanyahu, and there are more calls on him to step down, this time from Israel's opposition leader, Yair Lapid, who is slamming his handling of this war. Now, Lapid even went a step further to say that he's spoken to some of Netanyahu's Likud members, and they're trying to formulate a plan to potentially get him out. Now, that has since been rebuffed by the Likud party. That's Benjamin Netanyahu's party. They're calling it disgraceful, saying that there shouldn't be conversations, discussions in time of them on the ground. What we're hearing about this military operation is ongoing. We know that the head of Hamas, Israel Haniyeh, his home was struck by Israeli warplanes a little earlier today. The Israeli military was used as terror infrastructure, saying that Haniyeh had his house as a meeting place for Hamas operatives, saying that they used this home there to actually plan the attacks. Ismail Haniyeh currently lives in the Strip. He lives between Turkey and Qatar. While in other operations on the ground, Israel says it's now taken control of the Gaza port. Despite civilians an infant something that Hamas is already out of, saying that this naval command base. Jamie.
Sarah, thank you for that. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Well, that's a perspective from Israel. Our correspondent Marazine reports now from Gaza.
First of all, let me point out that currently there is no connection, no network, no internet. So actually, there is no word coming from the Al-Shifa hospital. Recently, the last time we spoke to a doctor, around 10 hours ago, he said that the Israeli tanks and forces withdrew from the Al-Shifa hospital, and then a few hours later, again, they entered the hospital with bulldozers, digging the floor and the front yard of the Al-Shifa hospital. Since then, we did not get any information. The letter that the doctor told us about is that they looked at the injuries and some of the doctors inside rooms and units, stopping anyone from moving around. Anyone who moves around or come close to a window, he will be directly shot. The Palestinian Health Ministry here in Gaza said that they have made their calls with the ICRC, with the United Nations, with the countries to help ease the situation inside the Al-Shifa hospital, at least injuries and premature babies. How they get an answer back until now. Meanwhile, the Israeli forces continue striking the Gaza Strip. I mean, overnight and this morning, the early hours this morning were really hard on the people of Gaza. Hundreds of airstrikes in northern Gaza and central Gaza City. The Palestinian Health Ministry said that at least there's 120 people killed only in northern and central Gaza City overnight and this early hour of the morning. Also here in southern Gaza, where I'm standing inside the Shuhada Al-Aqsa hospital since the morning, they received the hospital many injuries. 10th that were killed. Just half an hour ago, an Israeli warplane targeted Abu Dahroush family home in a Nusayrat refugee camp. 2 children were killed, 1 woman and 1 man.
Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez will stay in office for another term after narrowly winning the support of Parliament. It brings to an end months of political deadlock following an inconclusive general election in July. His Socialist Workers' Party had to strike several deals with regional groups to gain enough support. They include a contentious bill granting amnesty for Catalan separatists, which sparked protests across the country. Myanmar has ordered all government staff to prepare for military service. This comes as the army, which seized power in 2021, admitted it's facing heavy assaults from anti-military rebel forces, including drone attacks. China's foreign ministry says it's very concerned about the situation in Myanmar and is providing assistance to refugees who've crossed the border to flee the fighting. Britain's new Foreign Secretary David Cameron has visited Ukraine on his first working trip abroad. The former Prime Minister met President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, where he reaffirmed the government's support for Ukraine. Zelensky said the conflict in the Middle East has drawn global attention away from Ukraine. Cameron committed to working with allies to support Kyiv. People in Madagascar are voting in a presidential election boycotted by 10 out of 12 opposition candidates and marred by weeks of protest. President Andry Rajoelina is seeking a 3rd term, but opposition figures have declared him unfit to run. Many polling stations across the capital were quiet, except in areas that have traditionally supported the entrepreneur and former DJ. Pollution in the UK River has reached such a serious level that almost all waterways are polluted. A parliamentary report on the quality of river water in 2022 described a chemical cocktail of sewage, agricultural waste and plastic, prompting a review into how pollution laws are enforced. In a special investigation, CGTN has brought together a company accused of polluting, the regulator accused of not doing enough, and the fishermen and the paddleboarders who say their river is being poisoned. Our correspondent Yolo David reports.
Only 14% of British rivers are classed as having a good ecological status. The rest, including the Cleddau River in West Wales, are being polluted. Local fishermen and those who live nearby record and document what's being discharged into the river.
It has just become a dumping ground for industry because it's not being policed. There's no detent for anybody. Migratory salmon and sea trout have been demised in, I would say, over 25 years. They've rapidly dropped now over the last 5 years. So much so, I don't even think there's a sustainable amount of fish left in the Cleddau to keep the population going.
The environment regulator is Natural Resources Wales. It has a statutory obligation to protect, stop pollution and prosecute companies and individuals who harm the environment. This cheese-making plant in Pembrokeshire has apologised for discharging 2 different types of waste into the Cleddau River earlier this year. During their annual maintenance shutdown, senior officials were careful not to admit to doing anything illegal.
Biological material, which is in the outflow pipe, is something quite different and something that we have had analysis. They've been inconclusive at this stage as to what it actually is or how it is being formed. We believe it is some form of naturally occurring biological material, and that work's ongoing.
First Milk say they've spent almost $1 million on temporary measures to stop different substances being discharged into the Cleddau River and promise to invest a further $2.5 million by next spring. Rick Cooper is a kayaker and swims in the river. With others, he gathers samples, documents results and presents data to challenge polluters that the ecology of the Cleddau is being eroded.
First Milk need to stop doing what they're doing, which they have probably 80% solved the problem, but not 100%. I think Welsh Water must put phosphate reduction technology into the Merlin's Bridge plant as soon as possible. It's planned for their next investment cycle, so that could be 2030. It's too late for this river. It needs to happen immediately.
We join him on his boat to check other parts of the Western Cleddau River, and within a few minutes we see the extent of the problem.
We've just come across this slick and it stretches for about half a mile. It doesn't look natural. And just a few miles upstream, there is a sewage treatment plant, a sewage overflow pipe, and there's also the First Milk creamery.
In England, the regulator is the Environment Agency. Here in Wales, Natural Resources Wales has an annual budget of almost $320 million and 2,400 staff to regulate on behalf of the Welsh Government.
The state of rivers is not just solely an RW responsibility, it's all our responsibility, it's societal responsibility.
But you are the regulator and you are the watchdog.
We are indeed the regulator, we are indeed the watchdog. And where we come to cases...
So why don't you then prosecute companies that seem to be breaking the rules?
We do take action and we do prosecute where the evidence is there. But of course, in our approach to enforcement, we have multiple tools available.
NRW are currently investigating First Milk's suspected pollution in the Western Cleddau River. They say they're assessing evidence. At high tide last weekend, a frothy white fluid was released from the company's outflow pipe. And we saw treated and untreated sewage released into the same river from Welsh Water's overflow pipes. Iolo Ap Dafydd, CGTN, Haverfordwest, Wales.
The headlines again. China and the United States agreed to resume military communication after Presidents Xi and Biden meet in San Francisco. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.